What if the most dangerous horse in town refused every rider until it chose the one man who couldn't ride at all? In a frozen corner of Wyoming, a wild-eyed horse known as Unrideable was moments away from being put down, until a broken cowboy stepped forward with nothing but silence and scars. No rope, no force, just something the horse seemed to recognize. What happened next didn't just defy logic, it changed both of them in ways no one saw coming. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Stay with this story, because the moment that horse made its choice, everything began to change. The wind cut through the small Wyoming town like a blade, carrying with it the bitter sting of late winter. It rattled the loose boards of the old wooden pens and sent fine dust and frozen grit skimming across the ground. The auction yard had been thrown together from rough timber and stubborn necessity, its fences leaning, its gates creaking with every gust. The ground beneath was a mix of hardened mud and brittle ice, uneven and unforgiving, just like the men who gathered there. They came in thick coats and worn hats, cowboys, ranch hands, traders, and townsfolk drawn less by the promise of a good purchase and more by the rumor of something dangerous. Conversations drifted through the cold air, in low murmurs punctuated by laughter that carried a sharp edge. This wasn't just an auction. It felt more like a spectacle, something unpredictable, something that might turn ugly at any moment. From behind the holding pens came the harsh clatter of metal against wood, followed by a piercing, furious whinny. Heads turned. The restless energy in the crowd tightened, as if a storm were gathering in a place where storms had no right to be. Then the gate burst open. Ghost came out fighting. Two men strained at the ropes that bound him, and their boots digging into the frozen ground as they tried to hold him back. The horse's coat, a pale gray, washed with streaks of white, caught the dim light, but it was marred with old scars, thin lines crossing his flanks, thicker ones cutting along his shoulders. His muscles were coiled tight, every inch of him alive with tension. He jerked hard, dragging one man forward before snapping the rope taut again, forcing both handlers to stumble. His eyes moved constantly wide and alert, darting from face to face. His ears stood rigid, catching every sound, every shift in the wind. His breath came fast, visible in sharp bursts of vapor that vanished into the cold air. He broke Carter's arm, clean through, someone muttered from the back. Broke more than that, another voice replied. Heard a man died trying to ride him last spring. No one spoke loudly, but the words carried. Ghost didn't stand still for more than a second. He shifted, stamped, twisted, reacting to everything around him, as if the entire world were closing in. There was no rhythm to it, no pattern. It wasn't the controlled defiance of a wild animal testing boundaries, it was chaos. Raw, immediate, and desperate. It looked like fury, but it felt like fear. Earl Dawson stepped forward, his boots crunching against the frozen ground, as he moved into the center of the yard. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried all the same, hard, flat, and final. This animal, he said, gesturing toward Ghost, without so much as a glance of concern, has been nothing but trouble. Ain't worth the feed, ain't worth the risk. He paused, letting the murmurs settle. Sell him today, or he's done. I'm not keeping a killer in my yard. A man with a rifle stood near the fence, shifting his weight slightly, his hand resting too comfortably near the trigger. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. The crowd's tone changed. What had been curiosity edged into something heavier. A few men nodded. Others folded their arms, watching with narrowed eyes. The excitement was still there, but now it was laced with anticipation of something final. Then Cole Briggs stepped forward. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone used to being watched and admired. A faint grin tugged at his lips as he rolled his shoulders and reached for the rope. Reckon you're all making this harder than it needs to be, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Ain't a horse alive that can't be ridden. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Cole took the rope from one of the handlers, tightening his grip. He didn't hesitate. He pulled sharply, forcing Ghost's head to the side, trying to break his stance. When that didn't work, he jerked again, harder this time. Ghost reacted instantly. He twisted hooves, striking out in a sudden, violent motion that forced Cole to step back. The rope snapped taut again, but Cole leaned into it, teeth clenched, refusing to give ground. "Easy now," he muttered, though there was no ease in his voice. He raised his free hand and struck lightly at the horse's side, not enough to injure, just enough to assert control, to force compliance. Ghost exploded. His hind legs kicked out with terrifying force, his body surging upward as he reared, then twisted sideways. The movement was so sudden, so powerful that Cole lost his footing for a split second. It was all Ghost needed. He bucked hard, the rope slipping just enough, and in the next instant, Cole was airborne. The crowd gasped as he hit the ground hard, and the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Dust and frozen dirt clung to his coat as he rolled, scrambling to regain his footing. The confidence was gone now, replaced by something sharper, anger and a flicker of embarrassment. Ghost didn't stop. He struck the ground again, hooves pounding, dragging the rope, and forcing the handlers to retreat. His movements grew more erratic, less controlled, as if the world itself had become too much to bear. "Shoot it!" someone shouted. The word cut through the air like a crack of thunder. The man with the rifle stepped forward, raising it slightly. Others began to speak at once, some in agreement, others shouting for space, for caution, for something to be done. The crowd shifted back, widening the circle around Ghost, leaving him alone in a pocket of tension that felt ready to snap. Earl Dawson didn't move to stop it. He simply watched. At the edge of that circle, leaning against a weathered section of fence, stood Jack Callahan. He hadn't said a word. While the others watched the violence, Jack watched something else entirely. His gaze followed the horse's breathing, the way his ribs expanded too fast, the way his muscles trembled beneath the strain. He saw the flick of the ears, the quick dart of the eyes, not searching for an opponent, but for an escape. "Callahan," someone muttered nearby. "Didn't think you still showed up to these things." Another voice, quieter, carried a trace of pity. "Man can't even ride no more." The words hung in the air, but Jack didn't react. His attention never left the horse. A flash of memory cut through him, snow whipping sideways in a storm, a horse losing its footing beneath him, the sudden drop, the impact. A voice calling his name. Then silence. He pushed it down. Back in the present, Ghost turned again, the rope tightening as the man with the rifle steadied his aim. Jack straightened. Wait. The word wasn't loud, but it carried. Heads turned. The rifle lowered just slightly. Jack stepped away from the fence and into the open space. "I'll take him," he said. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the laughter came. It wasn't cruel, not entirely, but it was certain. Dismissive. "You," Cole said, pushing himself up from the dirt, brushing off his coat. "You can't even sit a saddle, Callahan. What are you going to do with him?" Jack didn't answer. He reached into his coat, pulling out a worn leather pouch. He held it out toward Earl Dawson. "It's everything I've got." Earl studied him for a long second, then glanced back at the horse, still straining, still fighting. "You're throwing your money away," he said flatly. "Maybe," Jack replied. The simplicity of it seemed to unsettle the man more than any argument could have. Cole let out a sharp laugh. "Go on then. Let's see it. Let's see the man who can't ride tame the one horse no one else can." Jack stepped past him. He didn't pick up a rope. He didn't reach for a saddle. He walked forward, empty-handed. "Hey," one of the handlers called. "You get too close." Jack didn't stop. Ghost turned toward him immediately. The change was instant. The horse's body tightened his head, lifting ears snapping forward. Every muscle coiled again, ready. The distance between them shrank one step at a time. Jack slowed before he reached him. He didn't enter the space where the horse would react. He simply stood, his hand lowered, palm open, his posture steady. "Easy," he said quietly. "I'm not here to break you." The words were barely audible, carried away almost as soon as they left his lips. Ghost didn't move. The crowd fell silent. For the first time since he'd been dragged into the yard, the horse stopped reacting to everything else. His focus narrowed, fixed entirely on the man in front of him. His breathing slowed. Not completely, but enough. His ears shifted, no longer pinned back, no longer rigid. He took a step. Just one. A ripple moved through the crowd. Then another. Jack didn't move, didn't reach, didn't speak again. Ghost closed the distance between them until only a breath separated them. His head lowered slowly, cautiously, until it hovered near Jack's outstretched hand. Time seemed to stretch thin. Then, with a movement so small it could have been missed, Ghost leaned forward. His muzzle touched Jack's palm. No kick, no rear, no fight. Just contact. The yard went completely still. The man with the rifle lowered it without thinking. Cole said nothing. Earl Dawson's expression shifted just slightly, but enough to show hesitation where there had been none before. Old Ben Carter, standing near the back, let out a quiet breath. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. Horse picked him. Jack's hand didn't move. He let it rest there, feeling the warmth, the breath, the tension still lingering beneath the surface. For the first time, Ghost stood without struggling. Earl exhaled sharply. "Fine," he said at last. "He's yours." It wasn't approval. It wasn't understanding. Just a decision made in the face of something he couldn't explain. Jack nodded once. And just like that, everything began to change. Why did Ghost react that way to Jack? What did he see in him that no one else could? Was it fear, pain, or something deeper that only broken souls recognize? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to subscribe before we step into the most intense part of the story. Jack brought Ghost home under a sky the color of old iron. The road from the auction yard to Martha Callahan's ranch was narrow and half-frozen, cutting through miles of pale grass and wind-bent fence posts. Jack walked ahead with the lead rope loose in his hand, never once pulling hard, never once turning to force the horse forward. Ghost followed, but not calmly. His head stayed high, his ears moved constantly. Every creak of leather, every distant crow, every shift in the wind made his muscles tighten beneath his scarred gray-white coat. Martha saw them coming before they reached the yard. She stood on the porch of the old farmhouse, one hand gripping the post beside her. The ranch behind her looked as tired as the people who lived there, leaning fences, patched roof boards, a barn with gaps between the planks, and a small corral that had seen better years. It was not the kind of place people brought trouble to. And Ghost looked like trouble. Martha came down the steps, slowly stopping a safe distance away. "Jack," she said, her voice tight. "Tell me you didn't." Jack kept his eyes on Ghost. "I bought him. You bought that horse." She looked at Ghost, then at her brother. The one they were ready to shoot, Jack, didn't answer right away. He guided Ghost toward the empty stall near the far end of the barn. He moved carefully, leaving space between himself and the horse's shoulder. Ghost jerked once at the shadow of the barn door, then snorted hard, his hooves scraping the frozen ground. Martha took a step back. Jack noticed, but said nothing. He opened the stall, then waited. He didn't drag Ghost inside. He simply stood beside the doorway, holding the rope low. For a long moment, Ghost refused. His eyes swept the barn, the hanging tools, the old tack, the narrow walls, the dark corners. His body trembled, as if the place itself had teeth. "It's all right," Jack murmured. No one's gonna hurt you here. At last, Ghost stepped inside. Jack unclipped the rope and backed away before closing the stall door. Ghost spun once, struck the floorboards with a hoof, and pressed himself into the far corner. His breath came in sharp bursts. Martha stood behind Jack, arms folded against the cold. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe not. That is not an answer. Jack looked through the stall rails at the horse. He's scared. Martha stared at him. He nearly tore that auction yard apart because they kept trying to force him. And what do you think you're doing? Jack didn't answer. He just took a step back from the stall and let the horse breathe. The first days were worse than Martha feared. Jack did not try to ride Ghost. He didn't even try to saddle him. Every morning, he carried feed into the barn, placed it near the stall, and walked away. Every evening, he cleaned what he could, repaired what Ghost broke, and sat several yards from the stall door with his back against a post. Ghost refused to eat while Jack was near. He watched everything. If Jack shifted too quickly, Ghost slammed his hoof into the boards. If a bucket scraped against stone, Ghost kicked it so hard it struck the wall and split. If the wind rattled a loose hinge, he threw himself sideways, as if expecting pain to follow the sound. Once during a hard gust, just before sundown, Ghost crashed into the stall door and broke the latch clean off. He burst out into the yard rope, trailing eyes wild. Martha screamed from the porch, but Jack only raised one hand. Stay back. Ghost ran to the edge of the corral, hit the fence line, reared, and spun in confusion. He could have bolted into the open range, but he didn't. He circled once, breathing hard, then stopped near the barn again, as if every direction felt like a trap. Jack approached slowly. No rope in hand, no anger in his voice. You don't know where safe is yet, he said softly. That's all. Ghost watched him. Jack opened the stall again and stepped aside. After several long seconds, Ghost walked back in on his own. That evening, Martha confronted Jack by the barn door. This has to stop, she said. Sell him. Turn him loose. Do anything but keep pretending this is something you can fix. Jack wiped mud from his hands with an old rag. I'm not trying to fix him. Then what are you doing? I'm trying to understand him. Martha's face hardened with fear disguised as anger. You tried to save someone once before. Jack went still. The words landed between them like a dropped blade. Martha's voice softened, but she did not take them back. You think I don't know what this is. You think I don't see it. You couldn't save Anna. So now you've dragged home the most dangerous animal in Wyoming because maybe somehow saving him will make the rest of it hurt less. Jack looked away. Martha regretted it the moment she saw his face, but the damage was done. I'm sorry, she whispered. Jack folded the rag slowly. He's not dangerous the way they say. Jack. He reacts before he thinks, like he expects every hand to bring pain. Jack looked toward the stall. That's not wickedness. That's fear. From then on, Jack paid attention to everything. He stopped walking straight toward Ghost. He approached from an angle, slow and steady. He stopped staring directly into the horse's eyes. He kept his shoulders loose. He moved with rhythm, always letting Ghost hear him before he entered the barn. Each day he spoke in the same low voice. Morning, boy. Just feed today. No hurry. Ghost never answered, not in any way most people would understand. But Jack noticed the smallest changes. The horse stopped striking the wall every time Jack opened the barn door. He began eating when Jack stood 10 steps away instead of 20. Then 8. Then 6. Metal was worse than anything. The clink of a buckle could send Ghost backward. The hard snap of a lead rope could make him rear. If a bit touched the stall rail, Ghost's eyes went white at the edges. Jack began removing everything from the barn that made those sounds. Old chains, rusted hooks, spare bits, heavy tack left from years before. He carried them out one by one and stacked them behind the shed, where Ghost could neither see nor hear them. One afternoon, while brushing dust from the outside of the stall, Jack noticed the deep marks beneath Ghost's mane. Not fresh wounds, but old pressure scars, where leather or rope had cut too long and too hard. There were similar marks along the jaw, hidden beneath pale hair. Jack's jaw tightened. "Who did this to you?" he whispered. Ghost stood rigid as Jack reached for the heavy old halter still hanging from one side of his head. The strap had been left loose, but the weight of it bothered him. Jack moved slowly, letting every motion begin before it finished. His fingers brushed the buckle. Ghost flinched. Jack stopped. "All right," he said. "We stop." He waited until Ghost's breathing steadied and then tried again. It took nearly an hour to remove one piece of leather. When it finally came free, Ghost backed into the corner shaking. But he did not strike. He did not rear. He did not run. Jack held the halter in his hand, like evidence. Martha had been watching from outside the barn. For the first time, she said nothing. Days passed. Then a week. Ghost remained unpredictable, but not in the same way. The violence did not disappear, but Jack could begin to read it. Fear had a shape, pain had a pattern, and Ghost's pattern was becoming clearer. Then one night, the past showed itself. A hard wind struck the barn after midnight, rattling the roof and pushing through the cracks in the walls. Jack woke to the sound of chaos, wood banging hooves, striking a terrible panicked scream from inside the barn. He grabbed his coat and ran. Ghost was throwing himself against the stall eyes, wide body slick with sweat despite the cold. Near the doorway, where it had fallen from an old hook, lay a saddle Jack had forgotten was there. It was old, cracked, and stiff with age. On one side of the leather was a burned mark, a crooked letter B inside a rough circle. Ghost saw it and lost all sense of where he was. He kicked the wall so hard a board cracked. Ghost Jack called, then stopped himself. The horse was not hearing him. Not really. Jack moved toward the saddle instead of the horse. He dragged it away slowly, keeping his body low, then threw it outside into the snow. Even after it was gone, Ghost continued trembling, his breath harsh and broken. Jack stood outside the stall until the horse quieted. By dawn, he knew the reaction had not been random. It had been memory. Later that morning, Jack rode into town in Martha's wagon and found old Ben Carter outside the blacksmith shop sipping coffee from a tin cup. Ben took one look at Jack's face and lowered the cup. What happened? Jack described the saddle, the mark, Ghost's reaction. Old Ben's expression darkened. That brand, he said slowly, belongs to men who don't like their names spoken too loud. Jack waited. Horse traders, some call them. Thieves, if you ask me. They took wild stock, stolen stock, anything they could get their ropes on. Broke them hard. Too hard. Ben looked out toward the road. If a horse fought back, they beat the fight out of it. If that didn't work, they sold it under a false name or sent it to slaughter. Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. Cole Briggs know those men. Old Ben did not answer quickly. That boy learned his method somewhere. Jack remembered Cole at the auction. The sharp pull of the rope. The quick strike to the flank. The confidence of a man who had done it before. By the time Jack returned home, he knew they were not finished with Ghost. That evening, far beyond the fence line, a rider appeared on the ridge. Cole Briggs sat in the saddle still as a bad thought. He did not come closer. He only watched. Jack saw him from the barn door. Ghost saw him too. The horse's entire body changed. He stepped back into the shadows, ears pinned, breath rising fast again. Jack moved between Ghost and the open yard. "Not tonight," he said. Cole turned his horse and rode away. But the danger remained. In the days that followed, Jack stayed closer to the barn. He slept lighter. He kept a lantern burning near the door. Still, he did not push Ghost. He did not saddle him. He did not ask for more than the horse could give, and slowly the space between them changed. Ghost began standing at the stall door when Jack entered. He no longer retreated every time Jack crossed the barn. Once when Jack dropped the feed, Ghost lowered his head and ate before Jack had left. Martha watched it all from a distance. One afternoon, she brought Jack coffee and stood beside him near the fence. "You're not trying to tame him," she said. Jack looked at her. "You're waiting for him to decide." Jack gave a faint smile. "That's about right. He reminds me of you." The smile faded, but he didn't deny it. Near sunset, with the sky turning pale gold over the frozen fields, Jack stepped closer to Ghost than he ever had before. Ghost stood in the open stall doorway, breathing slow, watching him. Jack raised one hand toward the horse's neck. The barn became quiet. Even Martha, standing outside, seemed to hold her breath. Ghost's muscles tightened, but he did not move away. Jack stopped an inch from touching him. "Only if you say so," he whispered. A long silence passed. Then Ghost lowered his head. Jack laid his palm against the warm curve of the horse's neck. No kick, no shudder, no panic. Ghost simply stood there, breathing beneath Jack's hand. Jack did not rub him, did not push further. He let the touch be enough. And in that moment, something in Jack shifted. Ghost was no longer a problem to solve, or a wound to bandage, or a debt owed to the dead. He was a living creature who understood what it meant to be trapped by something no one else could see. Jack had spent years thinking survival meant staying away from what hurt. Ghost was teaching him something different. Sometimes survival meant standing still long enough to trust again. But trust, once born, has a way of drawing danger toward it. The next morning, Jack saw the old saddle again, hanging near the far corner where he had moved it after the storm. His hand froze on the stall rail. The metal buckle tapped softly against the wood, stirred by a draft. The sound took him away before he could stop it. The barn disappeared. The cold became sharper. The wind louder. Snow slashed sideways through the darkness. Beneath him, a horse stumbled in floodwater that had risen too fast. He remembered Anna's voice calling from the far bank, thin and terrified beneath the roar of the storm. Jack. He had urged the horse forward. He had believed he could make it. He had believed love could outrun weather. Then the ground vanished. The horse slipped. Jack hit water, then stone, then snow. When he woke, he was alone. Jack staggered back from the saddle as if it had burned him. Martha found him there, pale and shaking. Jack. He turned away, but she had seen enough. That night by the kitchen stove, she finally told him what she had held inside for years. "There's something Anna said," Martha whispered. Jack's face tightened. "Don't. She didn't blame you." He looked at her, then sharp and wounded. "You don't know that. I do." Martha's eyes filled, but her voice held. "She told me before the fever took her. She said you would carry it if no one stopped you. She said to tell you it wasn't your fault." Jack stood so quickly, the chair scraped across the floor. "No, She wanted you to live, Jack. He shook his head, but the anger had nowhere to go. It broke apart before it reached his voice. You should have told me. I know. For years, Martha. I know. Silence filled the room. Then Jack sat down again slowly, as if his bones had given out. All the strength he had used to hold himself together seemed to leave him at once. Later, when the house was dark, Jack went to the barn. He carried no lantern. The moon gave enough light through the cracks in the boards. Ghost stood in the shadows, awake as always. When Jack entered, the horse lifted his head but did not retreat. Jack walked to him slowly. This time there were no careful words. No training. No method. He reached Ghost and rested his forehead against the horse's neck. For a long time, he did not move. Then the grief came. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a broken breath, then another, until Jack's shoulders shook, and the years he had swallowed finally found their way out. Ghost stood still. He did not step away from the weakness. He did not punish it. He stayed. And that was more than Jack knew how to bear. Outside, beyond the black line of the fence, Cole Briggs watched the barn light fade. He had seen enough. By the following night, the wind had risen again. Jack woke to a smell that did not belong to winter. Smoke. He was on his feet before he understood why. Martha shouted from the hall. Outside, orange light flickered against the barn walls. The east corner of the barn was burning. Jack ran into the yard, boots slipping on frozen mud. Ghost screamed from inside, a sound so raw it tore through the night. Then Jack saw them, dark shapes moving near the far gate. Cole and two other men, ropes in hand. Cole turned when Jack approached. You should have left him at Dawson's, he said. Jack didn't slow. You're not taking him. Cole's face twisted. That horse belongs to men who paid for him. He doesn't belong to anyone. Cole struck first. Jack was ready, but his bad leg betrayed him on the frozen ground. Pain shot through him as Cole slammed him against the fence. One of the other men moved toward the barn doors, trying to force Ghost out through the smoke. Martha appeared on the porch with a lantern. Jack, get help, Jack shouted. She hesitated only a second, then ran toward the road. The fire climbed fast. Dry boards caught one after another, flames racing along the wall, feeding on old hay and wind. Smoke rolled low and thick. Inside, Ghost thrashed against the stall, trapped between terror and instinct. Jack drove his shoulder into Cole and knocked him back, then stumbled toward the barn. A beam cracked overhead. Ghost was inside. For one terrible second, Jack stopped at the entrance. Heat pushed him back. Smoke filled his lungs. The fire roared like the storm from years ago. He could turn away. He could live. Then through the smoke, he saw Ghost's eyes. Not wild, not furious, afraid. Just as Anna had been afraid. Just as Jack had been afraid every day since. No, Jack whispered. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and ran in. The smoke blinded him almost instantly. He found the stall by memory and sound, coughing hard as sparks struck his coat. A fallen board had jammed the lower half of the door. Ghost kicked from the other side, making the wood shake. Easy, Jack choked. Easy, I'm here. He grabbed the board and pulled. It didn't move. He pulled again, pain tearing through his leg. Flames crawled along the wall beside him. Somewhere above the roof groaned. Jack planted one boot against the frame and used everything he had left. The board came free. The stall door burst open. Ghost charged out, nearly knocking Jack down, then veered through the smoke and into the yard. Jack stumbled after him, collapsing to one knee just beyond the barn doors as the night air hit his lungs, but it wasn't over. Cole, furious and desperate, swung onto his own horse near the gate. One of his men tried to cut Ghost off. The gray-white horse spun, confused by the flames, the shouts, the smoke. Then Martha screamed. Jack turned. She had fallen near the broken fence, caught on the wrong side of a spreading line of fire, where burning debris had scattered across the yard. Smoke curled around her. She tried to rise, but fell again, clutching her ankle. Jack staggered toward her, but the flames blocked the direct path. There was only one way to reach her fast enough. He looked toward the barn wall. The saddle hung near the door, half lit by fire. His hand reached for it and froze. The old fear came back with brutal force. Snow, water. Anna's voice, the horse falling, his body hitting stone, waking alone. His fingers shook so violently he could barely touch the leather. "I can't," he whispered. The barn cracked behind him. Martha coughed in the smoke. Cole shouted somewhere in the yard. Then Ghost stepped into the firelight. He did not run. He came to Jack. The horse's coat was streaked with soot, his sides heaving, but his eyes were fixed on the man who had come back for him. He lowered his body slightly, steadying himself in a way that needed no words. Jack stared at him. Ghost waited. No rope, no command, no force, only trust. Jack swallowed hard. "You sure about this, boy?" Ghost did not move. Jack dropped the saddle. He didn't need it. With a painful breath, he gripped Ghost's mane and pulled himself up onto the bare back of the horse that no man could ride. For one heartbeat, the world stopped. Ghost stood beneath him, trembling but still. Then he moved. Jack nearly lost balance at the first surge, but he leaned forward, holding tight, not to dominate, but to follow. Ghost cut through the smoke with shocking precision, avoiding burning boards and broken fence rails as if he could feel the danger before it arrived. Cole saw them and rode across their path. "Get off that horse," he shouted. Ghost didn't slow. Cole lunged, reaching for Jack's arm. Ghost twisted, powerful and sudden, then struck upward. Cole's horse shied. Cole lost his seat and hit the ground hard, rolling into the mud, just as Ghost thundered past. Jack didn't look back. Martha was barely visible now. Ghost reached her, skidding to a stop so close that Jack felt the heat against his face. He slid down, grabbed Martha beneath the arms, and pulled her up with a strength he didn't know he still possessed. "Jack," she gasped. "I've got you." He helped her onto Ghost first, then climbed up behind her. Ghost turned before Jack could ask. The horse ran. They cleared the smoke just as the main support beam of the barn gave way. The roof folded inward with a terrible groan, sending sparks into the black sky. Flames surged where they had been only moments before. Ghost stopped beyond the fence-line sides, heaving head low. Jack slid down, then helped Martha to the ground. She clung to him, shaking. Behind them, the barn collapsed completely. For a long moment, no one spoke. Men from town began arriving in the distance, lanterns bobbing along the road. Cole lay in the mud, groaning, too stunned to flee. The other men scattered, only to be met by riders coming up fast behind Martha's call for help. Jack stood beside Ghost, one hand buried in the horse's soot-darkened mane. His legs shook, his lungs burned. His past still lived inside him, but it no longer held the reins. Ghost turned his head slightly, his breath warm against Jack's shoulder. Jack leaned against him, exhausted. Martha looked at the two of them, tears cutting clean lines through the ash on her face. "You rode," she whispered. Jack looked at Ghost. "No," he said quietly. "He carried me." And beneath the smoke-filled Wyoming sky, with the barn burning behind them and the first signs of dawn still far away, Jack understood what had changed. He had not conquered the horse. Ghost had not been broken. They had simply trusted each other long enough to survive. Dawn came slowly over the ranch, pale light spreading across the frostbitten land, as if the night itself was reluctant to let go. The fire had burned itself down to smoldering ruin, leaving behind blackened beams, twisted nails, and the sharp, bitter smell of smoke that clung to everything it touched. What had once been a barn now stood as a broken skeleton against the cold Wyoming sky. Jack hadn't slept. He stood near the edge of the wreckage, one hand resting lightly against Ghost's neck. The horse was quieter now, though his sides still rose and fell with the memory of the night. Ash clung to his coat. Soot streaked across his face. But he stood steady, alert, not panicked. Martha sat wrapped in a blanket near the porch, her ankle bound, and her eyes fixed on the remains of what they had barely escaped. The sound of approaching horses carried across the frozen ground. Sheriff Dalton arrived with 3 men, their breath fogging in the cold air as they dismounted. He took one look at the burned structure, then at Jack, then at Cole Briggs, still bound, and sitting against a fence post with a bruised face and a hatred he could no longer hide. "What happened here?" the sheriff asked. Jack didn't look away from the ruins. He came in the night, tried to take the horse, set the fire to drive him out. Sheriff Dalton's eyes shifted to Cole. "That true?" Cole spat into the dirt, but said nothing. "That's what I thought." The sheriff motioned to his men. They moved through the wreckage, carefully examining what remained. Boot prints were still visible where the ground had softened under heat. Drag marks, broken boards, signs of a struggle that told a clearer story than words ever could. "This wasn't no accident," one of the deputies muttered. "No," Dalton replied. "It wasn't." Ghost shifted slightly beside Jack, but didn't pull away. His ears flicked toward the men, then back again. He was aware, cautious, but not the frantic creature he had been the day before. Martha watched him from where she sat, something new in her expression. Not fear, not entirely. Something closer to understanding. Old Ben arrived not long after, riding slow and steady as always. He dismounted without a word and walked straight toward the barn remains. He crouched near a pile of half-burned equipment, moving pieces aside with deliberate care. "What are you looking for?" Jack asked. Ben didn't answer at first. Then he lifted something from the ash, a length of leather charred at one end, but still intact enough to see the mark burned into it. The same crooked letter, the same brand Jack had seen on the saddle. "Well," Ben said quietly, "there it is." Sheriff Dalton stepped closer. "You recognize that?" Ben nodded once. "I do. And I wish I didn't." Over the next hour, more pieces surfaced. A ledger half burned but still readable in parts. Names that didn't match known ranches. Numbers that didn't line up with legal sales. Marks scratched out and replaced. Evidence of ownership altered and hidden. A set of iron tools used for rebranding livestock, and more straps, more leather, all carrying variations of the same burned symbol. "They've been running horses through here," Dalton said. "Stolen stock, broken hard, then sold off as something else." One of the deputies added, "We've had reports. Animals disappearing from smaller ranches. Never had proof." "You do now," Dalton replied. A few townsfolk began to gather at the edge of the property, drawn by the smoke and the news already spreading. They spoke in low tones, eyes flicking between the burned barn, the bound man at the fence, and the pale horse standing quietly beside Jack. The story was changing. Old Ben stood and turned to Jack. "That horse of yours, he ain't just any stray." Jack looked at Ghost. "I figured." Ben nodded toward the leather in his hand. "This mark belonged to a group that worked this territory a few years back. Took what they wanted, broke what they couldn't take easy." He paused. "There was a family out east of here. Lost nearly their whole herd one winter. Man tried to stop him, didn't make it. Jack's jaw tightened. "Ghost?" he asked. Ben nodded slowly. "Wouldn't surprise me if he came from that stock." The weight of it settled over the yard. What had been dismissed as a dangerous animal suddenly carried a different meaning. The scars, the fear, the refusal to be ridden. They were not signs of madness. They were signs of memory. Sheriff Dalton walked over to Cole and crouched in front of him. "You got anything you want to say before I make this official?" he asked. Cole laughed once, bitter and hollow. "You think this ends with me?" Dalton didn't react. "I think it starts with you." Cole's eyes flicked toward Ghost, then back to Jack. "That horse was worth more than you'll ever see in your life." Jack said nothing. Dalton stood. "Take him in." The deputies hauled Cole to his feet and led him toward the waiting horses. He didn't resist, not anymore. Before they rode out, Dalton turned back to Jack. "We'll be back. There's more to sort through here. But for now, you did the right thing." Jack gave a small nod. "I didn't do it for that," he said. "I know," Dalton replied. By midday, the investigation had spread beyond the ranch. Names surfaced, records were checked. Word reached neighboring towns. By evening, riders had been sent out with warrants. Earl Dawson was taken in without a fight, his confidence gone as quickly as it had once come. Men who had stood comfortably in the open were now being dragged into the light. And with them, the truth. Ghost's story changed with every telling. No longer the horse that threw riders for sport. No longer the beast that couldn't be controlled. He became something else. A survivor. Someone in the crowd said it first quietly, as if testing the weight of the words. "That horse ain't mean. He just remembers." The phrase stuck. Within days, no one called him Unrideable anymore. They spoke of him with a kind of distance, not fear, but respect. Acknowledgement of something they did not fully understand, but no longer dismissed. Jack noticed the change, but he didn't respond to it. He didn't need to. The ranch slowly came back to life. It took time. Days of hauling debris, weeks of repairing beams and resetting posts. Martha worked beside him when her ankle allowed it, and when it didn't, she directed from the porch with the same stubborn determination she had always carried. Ghost moved freely now. Jack didn't lock him into a stall again. Instead, he repaired the outer fence and opened the gate to the pasture beyond. The land wasn't much, just a stretch of grass and dirt, with patches of lingering snow, but it was enough. Ghost left on the first day. Martha watched him go. "You think he'll come back?" Jack leaned on the fence, eyes following the pale shape as it moved across the field. "Yeah," he said. "I do." That evening, just before sunset, Ghost returned. No rope, no call. He simply walked back through the open gate and stopped near the barn, as if that had always been his place. It became a pattern. He came and went as he pleased, but he always came back. A few buyers arrived within the week. Men who had heard the story, men who saw opportunity where others saw legend. "I'll give you double what you paid," one said. Jack shook his head. "Triple," another offered. "Cash." "No." They didn't understand at first. "Everyone's got a price," one of them insisted. Jack looked out at the field where Ghost stood, head lowered in the wind. "Not for him," he said, because Ghost wasn't something to be owned. And Jack wasn't something that needed proving anymore. He didn't ride into town to show what he could do. He didn't enter contests or take on work that would put him in the spotlight. The people who had once laughed now nodded when he passed some with quiet respect. others with a distance that suggested they were still trying to understand what had changed. Old Ben said it best one afternoon by the fence. "You didn't break that horse," he said. Jack shook his head. "No, you earned him." Jack considered that. Maybe, he said. Or maybe he just decided I was worth the risk. Winter began to loosen its grip. Snow melted in thin streams across the pasture. The ground softened. The air lost some of its bite. One morning, as the sun rose clear and pale over the hills, Jack stepped out of the house and saw Ghost waiting near the fence. Not restless, not wary, waiting. Jack walked toward him without thinking. He reached out, placing his hand against the horse's neck in a gesture that had become familiar. Ghost leaned slightly into the touch. No tension, no hesitation. Jack took a breath. Then, without stopping to question it, he gathered a handful of mane and pulled himself up. There was no jolt of panic, no flash of white fear, no storm, just a quiet shift of balance as he settled onto Ghost's back. The horse stood still for a moment, then began to walk. They moved across the pasture slowly, the ground soft beneath them, the early light stretching long shadows behind. Jack didn't guide. He didn't need to. Ghost chose the path. They climbed the low rise beyond the fence, where the land opened out into a wide stretch of rolling hills and pale grass. At the top, Ghost stopped. The world spread out in front of them. Endless, quiet, unclaimed. Jack looked out over it at the weight he had carried for years finally loosening its hold. He wasn't free of it, not completely, but it no longer owned him. Ghost shifted beneath him, steady and sure. Jack reached down, resting his hand once more against the horse's neck. "We made it," he said quietly. There was no one there to hear it. No crowd, no applause. Just the wind softer now, moving through the grass. Ghost was still the horse no one else could ride. But he had chosen, and that choice had changed everything, not in a way that shouted, not in a way that demanded to be seen, but in the quiet, undeniable way that real change always comes. Not as victory, not as conquest, but as trust finally returned where it had once been broken. 6 months passed before the past found its way back to the Callahan Ranch. By then, summer had come to Wyoming in full color. The snow was gone from the low hills, replaced by long grass that moved like water whenever the wind crossed the open land. The fences Jack had rebuilt stood straighter now. The barn, though smaller than the one that had burned, was stronger, cleaner, and brighter. Martha had planted wildflowers near the porch, and on warm mornings, bees drifted through them as if the ranch had never known fire. Ghost had changed too, not completely. He was still watchful around strangers, still lifted his head at the sound of metal, still preferred open space to closed doors. But he no longer lived as if every shadow meant danger. Some mornings he wandered far across the pasture and returned only when the sun began to fall. Other days, he stood near the fence, while Jack repaired tools or checked water troughs close enough to be part of the ranch, free enough to leave whenever he wished. Martha had stopped stepping back when Ghost came near. At first, she had only tolerated him. Then, she had accepted him. Now she spoke to him like a difficult but respected member of the family. "You stay out of my beans," she told him one afternoon, waving a wooden spoon from the porch as Ghost nosed too close to her garden. Jack laughed for the first time in what felt like years. It should have been peace. But sometimes peace felt too quiet. That was what Jack thought the day he saw the rider coming across the eastern road. The man was old, but not weak. He sat straight in the saddle, his coat faded, but brushed clean, his hat worn, but shaped with care. Everything about him suggested a person who had once owned land, hired hands, and commanded respect without raising his voice. He stopped at the edge of the yard and did not look at Jack first. He looked at Ghost. Ghost stood out in the pasture, pale against the deep summer grass. He lifted his head when the stranger arrived, ears forward, body still. The old man's face changed. It was not surprise exactly. It was recognition. Jack set down the hammer in his hand. The stranger dismounted slowly, one hand resting on the saddle horn longer than necessary. His eyes never left the horse. "That horse," he said quietly, "doesn't belong here." Martha stepped out onto the porch, instantly alert. Jack did not move toward his rifle. He did not need to. Something in the man's voice told him this was not the kind of danger that came with gunfire. But it was danger all the same. "Who are you?" Jack asked. The man finally looked at him. "Samuel Reed." The name meant nothing to Jack at first. But Martha's expression shifted. She had heard it before. So had half the county, likely though years and grief had turned the name into little more than a rumor. Samuel Reed had once owned one of the largest horse ranches east of town. Before the raids, before the stolen herd, before everything was lost, Jack looked back toward Ghost. Samuel followed his gaze. "I've been looking for him for years," the old man said. Jack's jaw tightened. "You're saying he's yours?" "I'm saying I raised him." The words settled heavily over the yard. Samuel stepped closer to the fence, but not too close. Ghost watched him tense, but not panicked. That alone made Jack uneasy. Ghost did not look at the old man in the way he had looked at Cole Briggs. There was no immediate terror, no wild refusal. There was something else. Memory, maybe, but not trust. Samuel pointed toward Ghost's left shoulder. "There's a scar there shaped like a crescent, low just behind the shoulder blade. He got it as a yearling caught himself on a broken gate after a summer storm." Jack said nothing. He knew the scar. Samuel continued, his voice steady but strained. "And under his mane, near the base of the neck, there's a dark patch of skin. No hair grows right over it. My son used to say it looked like a black stone in snow." Martha looked at Jack. Jack looked away. Those details were too specific to be guessed. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, old and softened from handling. He passed it through the fence. Jack took it. It was a drawing done in charcoal. A younger Ghost stood at the head of a herd, mane lifted by wind, one ear slightly notched, the same long blaze running down his face. Beneath the sketch was a name written in a careful hand. Not Ghost. Ash. Jack stared at it for a long moment. "He wasn't wild?" Martha asked softly. Samuel shook his head. "No. He led the herd. Proud thing. Smarter than most men I ever hired." His gaze returned to the horse. He knew every gate, every ridge, every storm before it broke. My boy loved him. The yard grew still. Until that moment, Ghost had been a rescue. A survivor. A creature Jack had pulled from the edge of death and given space to heal. Now he was something else. Someone else's last living memory. Jack folded the drawing carefully and handed it back. "I'm sorry for what happened to your herd," he said. Samuel accepted the paper, but his eyes sharpened. "Sorry doesn't change ownership." Martha drew in a breath. Jack held Samuel's gaze. "No, it doesn't." Samuel's voice did not rise. That made it harder. "I'm not here to threaten you, Mr. Callahan. I heard the stories, heard what you did for him. For that I'm grateful." His expression tightened, grief moving beneath the surface like deep water. "But gratitude doesn't bring back what was taken from me." Jack glanced toward Ghost. "He's not the same horse you lost." "No," Samuel said. "Neither am I the same man." For the first time, Jack saw the full weight behind Samuel's calm. The man was not only claiming property, He was reaching for the last piece of a life that had been destroyed. Samuel looked toward the pasture. My wife died the winter after the herd was taken. Fever, they called it. But grief had done half the work before sickness ever came. My son. His voice faltered for the first time. My son rode after the thieves. He never came home. Martha covered her mouth with one hand. Jack looked down. The mirror was too clear to ignore. Samuel had lost his wife, his son, his ranch, his future. And somehow tied to all of it was the horse standing in Jack's pasture. The same way Anna's memory had once been tied to every saddle Jack could not touch. This was not a fight between right and wrong. That was what made it worse. Samuel placed one hand on the fence rail. I don't want trouble, but I won't walk away from him. Not after all these years. Ghost shifted in the pasture. Everyone turned. He took 3 slow steps toward the fence, then stopped. His eyes stayed on Samuel. His ears moved forward, then sideways. He did not come running. He did not hide. He watched. Samuel's face softened in a way that hurt to see. Ash, he said gently. Ghost lifted his head slightly. Jack felt something inside him tighten. The horse recognized the sound. Not fully. Not enough to cross the distance. But enough. Samuel swallowed. You remember, don't you? Ghost did not move. After a long silence, Samuel stepped back from the fence. I'll come back in 3 days, he said, and I'll take what's mine. Jack's hand curled against his side, but he did not argue. Samuel mounted his horse. Before turning away, he looked once more at Ghost. I waited too long to find him, he said. I won't lose him again. Then he rode away, leaving the yard heavier than any storm. That evening, Jack stood at the pasture fence long after sunset. Ghost grazed in the distance, pale as moonlight against the dark grass. Martha came to stand beside him. If he really belongs to that man, she said quietly, what will you do? Jack did not answer, because he did not know. For months, loving Ghost had meant protecting him from men who wanted to control him. It had meant giving him space, patience, safety. It had meant proving that not every hand brought pain, but now love might mean something else. It might mean letting him go. The thought hollowed Jack out. Over the next 3 days, he did not change his routine. He fed Ghost in the morning, checked the trough, walked the pasture line, sat beneath the old cottonwood near the fence while Ghost stood nearby, sometimes close enough to touch, sometimes farther away. He did not saddle him. He did not ride him. He did not call him more than usual. But the distance between them felt different now. Not broken, not cold, like a goodbye being practiced without either of them admitting it. On the second evening, Jack walked beside Ghost through the lower pasture. The sun was low, turning the grass copper. Ghost moved slowly, matching Jack's pace. You know him, Jack said. Ghost's ear flicked back. Jack gave a sad smile. Of course you do. The horse breathed out soft and warm. I don't know what's fair, Jack admitted. He lost you. I found you. Neither of those things makes the other disappear. Ghost lowered his head to the grass. Jack looked toward the far road where Samuel had vanished days before. I won't put a rope on you, he said. Not for him. Not for me. The third day arrived bright and windless. That alone made it feel unnatural. Samuel Reed came just after noon. He rode alone, no deputies, no hired men, no rifle across his saddle. Only a bridle looped over one arm and the leather old but well cared for. Jack stood near the pasture gate. Martha waited on the porch, hands clasped in front of her. She did not come closer. This was not her choice to make, and she seemed to understand that. Samuel dismounted and walked toward the fence. Jack opened the gate. Neither man entered at first. Ghost stood in the middle of the pasture watching them both. For several minutes, no one said his name. No one whistled. No one clicked their tongue or stretched out a rope. The old man stood on one side. Jack stood on the other. Ghost stood between them. The choice, if it was to be real, had to belong to him. Samuel was the first to speak. His voice was low, almost tender. "Come on, boy." Ghost's head lifted. Jack felt every muscle in his body tighten, but he forced himself to remain still. Samuel held out one hand. "Come on, Ash." The name moved through the field like a ghost of its own. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ghost took one step toward Samuel. Martha gripped the porch rail. Jack's chest tightened so sharply he could hardly breathe. Ghost took another step. Samuel's eyes filled, but he did not move forward. He let the horse come. Ghost stopped halfway between them. His ears shifted. He looked at Samuel, then at Jack. The silence became unbearable. Jack wanted to speak, wanted to say his name, wanted to remind him of the barn, the fire, the mornings in the pasture, the first touch the long, quiet road from fear to trust. But he said nothing, because love that begged was just another kind of rope. Ghost lowered his head, then raised it again. He took one more step toward Samuel, then stopped. The old man's hand trembled. "Ash," he whispered. Ghost breathed in and turned. Slowly, without panic, without confusion, he walked toward Jack. Jack did not move. Ghost crossed the remaining distance and stopped in front of him. Then, just as he had done at the auction yard months before, he lowered his head. Jack closed his eyes. The moment struck with such force that he almost reached out too quickly. Instead, he let his hand rise slowly and rest against Ghost's forehead. No one spoke. The pasture seemed to hold its breath. Samuel's hand fell to his side. For a long time, the old man simply stood there, looking at the horse. He had searched for the horse that had remembered him, but had not chosen to return. At last, Samuel nodded once. Not in anger, in grief, in understanding. He remembers Samuel said his voice rough, "But he chose you." Jack looked at him, unable to find words. Samuel gave a faint, broken smile. "That's the thing about horses. You can raise them, feed them, lose them, search half your life for them." He looked at Ghost. But in the end, their trust is still theirs to give. Jack swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I know." Samuel looked suddenly older. Jack stepped aside. "You can come say goodbye." Samuel hesitated, then walked forward slowly. Ghost did not move away, but he did not lean in either. Samuel stopped close enough to touch him, then placed one weathered hand gently against the horse's neck. "Ash," he whispered. Ghost stood still. Samuel bowed his head. For a moment, it was not about ownership at all. It was about all the dead who could not stand in that pasture, all the years that could not be returned, all the things a man carries, because letting go feels too much like losing twice. Then Samuel stepped back. He removed the bridle from his arm and held it out toward Jack. Jack didn't take it. Samuel looked down at the leather, then understood. He let it fall gently to the grass. "No," he said. "I suppose he doesn't need that." He turned toward his horse. Martha came down from the porch but stopped before reaching him. "Mr. Reed," she said softly. "Thank you." Samuel mounted slowly. He looked once more at Ghost, then at Jack. "Take care of him." Jack nodded. "I will." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, but not with anger. "No," he said. Don't just take care of him. He glanced toward the open pasture. Let him stay free enough to keep choosing. Then he rode away. This time Ghost watched him go. He did not follow. He did not run from him either. He simply stood beside Jack until Samuel became a small shape on the road, then disappeared into the bright afternoon. Only then did Jack release the breath he had been holding. Ghost nudged his shoulder gently. Jack laughed once, though it sounded almost like pain. "You could have made that easier," he whispered. Ghost lowered his head to the grass, unconcerned. Life settled again after that, but not into the same shape. Something had been tested and found true. Jack no longer wondered whether Ghost stayed because of habit safety or fear of the world beyond the fence. The gate remained open, the pasture remained wide, and every evening Ghost came back. Not because he was trapped, because he chose to. A few weeks later, Jack and Ghost walked out beyond the far ridge together. Jack did not ride that day. He did not need to. The horse moved beside him, matching his pace shoulder near shoulder, two shadows stretching long across the open land. The sun was sinking over Wyoming, laying gold across the grass. Jack thought of Samuel Reed of Anna, of all the lives changed by loss and the strange ways memory found a body to live in. He thought of the day at the auction when everyone had called Ghost dangerous. He thought of the fire, the choice, the silence in the pasture. And finally, he understood. Ghost had never been a horse no one could ride. He had been a horse who refused the wrong rider. A horse who knew the difference between a hand that wanted control and a hand that understood pain. A horse who had survived cruelty, remembered kindness, and still found the courage to choose. Jack placed his hand against Ghost's neck as they walked. The horse did not stop. Neither did Jack. Together they moved across the open range, not as owner and animal, not as broken man and rescued horse, but as two living things that had once been shattered and had somehow, against all reason, learned to trust again. For me, this story is not only about healing, but also about learning not to confuse love with possession. Jack cared deeply for Ghost, but the most powerful thing he did was not keeping the horse by force. It was allowing Ghost to choose. Sometimes, when we love something or someone, we think holding on proves how much we care. But real love requires enough courage to open the gate, even when we are afraid they might leave. And if they stay, it means something far deeper than ownership. It means trust. Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. If it touched your heart, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about courage, trust, and second chances. Your support truly means a lot.